there, this is Sky and welcome to Queer Stories. So today I want to talk to you about what does it mean to be non-binary. So recently I came out as non-binary to myself, talking to my colleagues, my friends, and my family about it. And I realized when I was going through this process that a lot of people don't really know what non-binary means. And I also want to just preface this all by saying that to anyone who does identify as non-binary, it kind of means something a little bit different to everyone. So I think it's normal that not everyone would understand what non-binary means, particularly what it means to somebody on an individual level. And some people are more comfortable talking about it than others. And so it can feel a little bit like, like you're prying when you're going into intimate details about how somebody feels about their gender. So that's why I thought it might be nice to make this video. That way, if this is helpful to anyone else that's coming out as non-binary and wants to share some resources with family and friends, that hopefully this can be useful. So first of all, what is the difference between gender and sexuality? I'm just going to touch on this super briefly to say that gender is how you feel about yourself on the inside. It has nothing to do with how the world sees you, but it's how do you feel about yourself on the inside. And sexuality is who you are attracted to. So sexuality actually doesn't have anything to do with gender. My gender and who I feel like on the inside is separate from who I might be attracted to and who I might want to form relationships with. So for the purpose of this video, we are focusing on gender and we are not touching anything to do with sexuality. So first, I'd just like to talk about genders in general. In the past, in our society, in North America, we have always operated in a binary system. And what that means is that there's only two choices. The first choice is boy or man, and the second choice is girl or woman. When trans people started being more recognized in the media, this also ignited a debate. Well, okay, where do they fit? Under, man or woman? Does a trans person belong under the umbrella of how they were born and how they were identified at birth based on their outwardly facing sex characteristics? Or do they belong under the umbrella that they are socially living and breathing in and a part of every day? People will all agree now that the place where they belong is under the umbrella of where they live and breathe every day, where they feel like on the inside, and that's the most important thing. There are some people, like J.K. Rowling, that feel like it's not fair to group in people like trans women under the umbrella of women because women that were born women have different medical needs and different issues in society than trans women do. I don't agree with J.K. Rowling. It's not that I don't think that these different groups have their own different concerns. It's just that I feel like everybody belongs under the umbrella of woman who defines themselves as a woman. And that's it. Underneath it, if we need to start making differentiations because of things like medical concerns, then we can go into, okay, what are the concerns that trans women have? What are the concerns that women who are assigned female at birth have? And where do these overlap? But I don't really see the sense in us making those differentiations for an everyday conversation because it really doesn't make a difference. And the same thing for men. So under this umbrella of men, we can have assigned male at birth and trans men. So when it comes to trans people that do identify with one or the other, in other words, trans people that fit within that binary of male or female, it's relatively easy for people to understand, right? I was born as a female. I feel like a male. I'm going to transition to male. And there are societal impacts to that, such as, you're changing your name and your pronouns, but there's also usually some kind of medical intervention that's happening there as well. So you're changing your appearance, you might be having surgery, you might be taking hormones. That is what we generally think of as a trans person, right? Somebody that is going all the way from one gender to the other. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. As time has gone by, there are more and more people like myself that are saying, well, we don't really feel super comfortable in either side of that binary. Some people might feel like a combination of both boy and girl. Some people might feel like they're not boy or girl. Some people might feel like they fluidly go from one to the other, depending on the day and so on. Basically, what non-binary people are saying is, but wait, what if I don't really feel like a boy or a girl? How do I identify? How do I talk to the world about myself? And this is why this umbrella term called non-binary exists. But non-binary itself is a combination of other smaller identities. So, it could be that somebody who is non-binary just uses the non-binary label like I do because that's the simplest way for me to communicate it to others. And frankly, I don't really think it's any of your business to understand within that spectrum where I lie. I'm non-binary and that's good enough for me to present to the public. But there are people that do want to go with some more specific terms that describe how they feel about their gender a bit more in detail. There's more words. There's like a bajillion words that can describe an experience that someone has that doesn't fit within the standard binary. Non-binary folks are also sometimes referred to as gender non-conforming because we don't want to conform with the binary, or gender diverse. So you might be wondering, are non-binary people trans? Not all non-binary people are going to identify with the label of trans because up until now, as I said, the majority of people think of trans as somebody that transitions from one gender all the way over to the other. And that's not usually the experience of people that live somewhere off of this spectrum. But when you look at the actual definition of what does transgender mean, it really just means as somebody who identifies as a gender that is not the same as the one that they were assigned at birth. And so yes, non-binary people could call themselves trans, and some do. We can think of trans again as another umbrella term that encompasses trans men, trans women, and all of these non-binary folks that are somewhere in their own little universe. So we can think of trans as its own umbrella term, and within the umbrella of trans, there's trans men, trans women, and non-binary people of all types. But it's up to each person to choose which labels they identify with and that they are comfortable with to describe their experience to the world. And that will be different for everyone. So you might be wondering, what does a non-binary person look like? I mean, we probably all have in our minds this idea of what a stereotypical man looks like. Like the men in the meat commercials. Or we might have this idea of what a stereotypical woman looks like, I don't know, the Kardashians or something. But, when you think of somebody non-binary, what do you normally think of? What do they look like? What you would probably imagine in your head is that that person presents themselves in a very androgynous manner. In other words, they try to make themselves look on the outside like you can't tell whether they're male or female. And this might be true for some people, but non-binary people are not defined by how they present themselves on the outside. We are defined by how we feel on the inside. And especially for people that are gender fluid, that like to change their gender presentation from one day to another, they might appear really female on one day and they might appear really male on the next. And so you really can't tell what a non-binary person looks like on the outside. And I do feel like a lot of non-binary people that I've spoken with so far, I mean, I've not spoken with many. I've probably met maybe a dozen other people that are non-binary. And I do feel like there is a pressure within this group for us to present ourselves in an androgynous manner so that that resonates with people, that they understand better that we don't feel like one or the other on the inside. But the reality is that that pressure should not be there. Just like there should not be pressure for a man to present himself in a male way, and that there shouldn't be pressure for a female to present herself in a female way, we should not have pressure as non-binary people to dress one way or the other. It doesn't have anything to do with the clothes that you wear. Like, we can see the amazing Harry Styles can wear a dress if he wants to wear a dress, and that doesn't mean that he's not male. He still defines himself as male. And then we can look at women like my favorite comedian Tig Notaro, who presents in a more masculine way. That doesn't make her any less of a woman. So me as a non-binary person, I can live anywhere on the spectrum. I can wear whatever clothes that I want, and that should not define whether or not I get to be non-binary. I also want to point out that when you're looking for characteristics on the outside, there are some non-binary folks that do have body dysmorphia, similar to how a trans person would have it. In other words, there are some non-binary people that will need medical intervention, like gender confirming surgery. Each non-binary person is different, and depending on what parts of your body you're totally comfortable with and which parts don't feel good to you, that will be different from one person to another. And there are some non-binary people that will never have surgery or that will never go on hormones. And there are some non-binary people that will have surgery and that will go on hormones. And so you really can't tell on the outside what a non-binary person looks like. A non-binary person is not strictly androgynous. I have also heard some people say that this is just a way for women to escape womanhood, that they are all declaring themselves non-binary. So I can't speak for all non-binary folks. I don't know what the stats are. I don't know that anybody knows what the stats are. But generally speaking, when I talk about the non-binary people that I know, that I interact with, for example, at work, out of the 10 non-binary folks that I know, roughly half of them were assigned female at birth and roughly half of them were assigned male at birth. And so it's not something that is exclusively a young female thing that's happening. And I think that's really important for people to hear. So I've had some people say to me, why are so many people coming out as non-binary nowadays? And this is the question that I think irritates me the most when I start talking about this stuff. Because people are accusing me of joining a fad, saying you're only doing this because everybody's doing this, and you love to go along with what everyone's doing, which frankly isn't true about me as a human being to begin with. But let me state this right now. Nobody is going to put themselves through what I have been through in the past few months if they're not actually non-binary, because it's really hard, okay? It's really hard to put your truth out there in the world. It's really hard to ask your friends and family to call you by a different name and to use different pronouns with you. There is nothing about coming out as non-binary that is easy. And so I have a really hard time believing that somebody would choose to do this as a part of a fad. I have a really, really hard time believing that. Generally speaking, I'm just going to throw that away as not the reason why there are more non-binary people coming out nowadays. There might be more people questioning their gender because of the fact that it is something that we talk about nowadays, but I think the idea of questioning one's gender is sort of a healthy exploration, right? And something that a lot of people do, even if they're not non-binary or they're not trans. I think most people, especially as they're growing up and they're going through puberty and, a lot of that stuff is happening, that they go through those periods of questioning. Just like people might go through periods of questioning their sexuality. And some of this stuff is not static throughout the course of our lives, right? Like there are phases that people go through. There are sometimes things that people will try out and doesn't work for them. But you know what? It's not for anyone else to define what is acceptable on your journey in life. Everybody's journey is different. Now for me, I'm almost 40 years old, and so I have lived to see this word non-binary kind of become something that people are more familiar with. And I really think that is more what to do with why we see more people coming out as non-binary today. So here are a few reasons that I came up with. When I was young, I always felt different. I always knew that, it almost felt like I was walking around with a stone in my shoe. Like there was something that was a little uncomfortable, and it was just lingering like that. Like I wish I could I could stop for a second, take my shoe off and get that stone out of my shoe. But I didn't have the time to stop and think about it. And I also didn't have the language to explain what was going on inside of me, because we didn't talk about this stuff in the late 90s. I think I might have met one non-binary person when I was in college, but apart from that one person that I met at that time, this whole concept of what it means to be non-binary, the adoption of they, them pronouns, all of this has become more common over the past 20 years. And so now I have the language to describe how I feel. I also do not want to underestimate the pressure that we face from our social groups to conform with the gender that we're assigned at birth. We get a lot of positive reinforcement for gender, right? Like when you are a female and you dress in a nice, sexy looking dress, there's a lot of people who will say, wow, you look great tonight. And that is a form of social pressure. Even though it's a positive reinforcement, it is reinforcing you to dress the way that other people approve of, rather than you dressing the way that you feel comfortable in. And so there's those sorts of social pressures of people saying, oh, you looked so beautiful with your long blonde hair. Why did you cut it short and dye it purple? And I'm like, because I like it short and purple, and that has nothing to do with you. Being told that people would kill to have hair that was long and beautiful and blonde the way that I had it when I was younger, right? So those sorts of little tiny social pressures can build up over time until you believe that the only way that you will be accepted by your peer group is if you present in a way that they approve of, because that is the only way that you're getting approval. And when you start to present yourself in a way outside of the standard, you don't get as many people saying, oh, you look so nice today. You might get people that say, wow, you're so brave. I've had that before. Wow, you're so brave to dye your hair purple. I've always wanted to dye my hair purple, but I've never had the courage. The number of times that people have said that to me, right? But, that is another form of social pressure that I think people underestimate how much that builds up in a person and how much that makes you feel like you have to conform. Social pressure also takes place in the workplace, right? Especially when I was doing a job where I was customer facing and I was traveling around the world a lot. I might have been traveling to countries like India and Japan and all kinds of different countries. And I was literally told you should dress more conservatively and keep your presentation more conservative. Otherwise, it may affect our ability to do business properly. And so, like in the old days, we had to wear suits. Not very many people wear suits to work anymore, but still, this idea of traveling to other countries that have their own versions of what is and is not acceptable in terms of gender presentation, it's a lot safer to present yourself in a standard way if you're going to be doing business abroad. And so for me, that was a major factor of why I kept my presentation so standard for so long. It wasn't because I enjoyed presenting myself that way. It was because I was basically told if you want to do business in other countries, you have to look a certain way. And I think that's not true anymore. And I think that we can see in many cases that that's not true anymore. And so I'm not really worried about that. And now, in fact, at my workplace, there are company guidelines that are anti-discrimination guidelines that say, if you misgender me on purpose over and over again, so in other words, if you don't use they, them pronouns with me on purpose and you do it over and over again, you will actually get written up for that. And you could even be fired for that because it is seen as a form of harassment. And so I have protection at work now that I never had before. And so that has made the world a safer place for me to come out as non-binary. Using they, them pronouns has also become more normalized. And so I don't have to start from scratch when I explain to everybody about how to use these pronouns. There are usually a few questions and a few people that say, oh, that's a plural pronoun. It's not grammatically correct. We'll get into that in a separate video that I'll do about pronouns. But generally speaking, it's becoming normalized enough that people can pick it up without too much difficulty. And so this is another reason why I think a lot more non-binary people are coming out, is because when you see people that are like you, that are unafraid, that are using the pronouns that make them comfortable, presenting themselves in a way that makes them comfortable, it makes it feel safer for you to do that as well. So it's not you jumping on a bandwagon with anyone else. It's a safer world right now for non-binary people to come out. So just a brief word about how to be respectful to a non-binary person. I'm going to do separate videos on how to use pronouns and how to be supportive of someone non-binary that comes out to you. But in general, if you want to be respectful, it's really easy. Use the name that somebody asks you to use. Use the pronouns that somebody asks you to use. That's it. That's all. It's only respectful. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you learned something about what it means to be non-binary. Take care.